last 10. Hart jumps it in and it's Waller. He spins into the end zone for the touchdown. Watching greatness on one end in LeBron. There's a dude with 35 in white getting it done defensively and then offense taking over the fight. Mama, there goes that man.
They have shared a brilliant championship battle, but the championship can only be won by one, and it's going Dutch in 2021. Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the WaterBoy Experience. I am your host, the WaterBoy himself, Davis McLemore, and boy, what a week it was for the two of us. We got some NFL news to talk about. We got a little bit of a college football scandal here to talk about as well. My good friend Jason here is playing a game called Retro Bowl. If you haven't heard of Retro Bowl, it's pretty fun. It's based off of the Techno Bowl, old Nintendo whatever game it was. I don't know what console it was on.
But we're not sponsored by it, so if you want to download it at your own free will, but we are not being paid to advertise it. So stop advertising it. This is money we're not making.
Well, maybe they'll give us maybe we'll just wake up in the morning, there'll be a check in the mail for us for like, I don't know. How much do you think that spot would be worth?
On this podcast, we'd probably have to end up paying them.
Tecmo Bowl, please. I can't even get their name right. God damn it. Forget it. Don't download Retro Bowl. But anyway, we got some Formula One news to talk about as well, and we're basically just going to try to get our way through this episode here. Before we start off anything else, do we have any updates on the Cristiano Ronaldo lashing situation?
At the moment, we are not allowed to talk about that. Right now, we're in contact with Mr. Ronaldo's lawyers, and we are being told to keep shush on the subject.
Actually, I received a pretty stern email from Cristiano Ronaldo's lawyer. I emailed him reaching out for questions, and he said, "Who the fuck are you?" And so, it is what it is, whatever. So anyway, let's just jump right into it in the NFL. The two big games that we're going to talk about were two of the bigger losses. This is Mr. Jason Shaddix, the Red Bull chugging son of a gun, by the way. I didn't formally introduce you. This is his first major, big, upsetting, disappointing, depressing loss as a Detroit Lions fan. If you'll recall, he became a Detroit Lions fan about a year ago. This past Sunday was not pretty, and it wasn't pretty for us either, but at least there's some light at the end of the tunnel on your game. So do you want to talk about what happened to your Detroit Lions for just a second?
Well, I knew it was going to be a difficult game, and I knew that it was going to be very difficult for them to score any points. And boy, could I have been more nail on the head with that one, because we did not score a single point till the fourth quarter. The game was 6-28, I believe. Oh no, my bad. 6-38. Enough said. Now let's talk about your boys, because at least my boys, I always said, well, you know what? They're not going to be your Super Bowl contenders, but they're going to be a good team, and they're going to lose some games. And I was right. They lost some games. But you guys, the Las Vegas Raiders, they lost to the, what was it? The Chicago Browns, the Cleveland Bears. Who the fuck did they lose to? Because quite honestly, they're just such a horrible team, and yet they still beat you. And I actually look at their score. They were 1-5.
Now 2-5.
Now they're 2-5. So tell us, what do you think about it? What was your reaction to the fact that the Raiders didn't score a point until the second quarter with 1:47 left on the clock? Even then, it was just a field goal. In the meantime, the Browns had scored 2 touchdowns. And then, of all people to start, you started Brian Hoyer, scored a fucking touchdown. Aiden O'Connell, though, he threw the touchdown to Jacoby Myers that led to your one and only touchdown. So he was pretty good. He was better than Hoyle. But here's the thing. He also had 1 interception compared to Hoyer's 2. So boom. And I actually did the research on that, so I'm not talking out of my ass. So yeah, what do you think about that?
you're jumping the gun a little bit. I just wanted to say this Detroit Lions loss is not all that bad. At least you could say that you were going up against a pretty good team in the Baltimore Ravens.
Oh, please don't give me that.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have our first. Oh man, he hung up. Never mind. I was going to say we had our first caller on the show, but I don't even know who that was. But anyway, it was probably Cristiano Ronaldo himself trying to tell us what was going on. But anyway, I doubt it.
We're too good for him. No, but going back to what I was saying, you're kind of bearing the lead here. I just gave you all those stats because, look, I don't want to talk about the Lions because this was expected from the Lions. We're not expected to be a 49ers, an Eagles, a fucking Ravens team. But you guys, you got Devontae Adams, you got Jacoby Myers, you have all these great players, and yet you guys lost. So don't try to change the subject. Let's go into the real juicy tidbits. Let's talk about that game.
All right, you want juicy tidbits? I'll give you my juicy tidbits. I'll put them right here on the table, nice and juicy for you. So, the biggest mistake that we made throughout the entire game, throughout the entire weekend, was not starting Aiden O'Connell in this game. And I know what everybody else is going to say. Oh, well, we would have lost if Aiden O'Connell started regardless. That doesn't matter. What's important now is we see that Jimmy Garoppolo is not a reliable quarterback. Brian Hoyer sure as hell isn't a reliable long-term quarterback. Aiden O'Connell could be our guy of the future. So if there was ever a moment to start a young rookie quarterback to see what he can do, this was the moment. But instead, we had to get Brian Hoyer, who happens to be buddies with Josh McDumbfuck because he played on the Patriots. So then we were stuck with this. I didn't watch this game. I had no desire. I have no desire to watch Raiders football at the moment. And you can call me a fake fan if you want, but it's terrible to watch. But I looked down at my phone when it was 14-0, and I knew exactly how this was going to end. We let this kid, Tyson Bagent, whatever his name was, it doesn't even matter. Nobody will remember his name next week. We let him look like an absolute star. He looked like the second coming of Tom Brady, the second coming of Peyton Manning or whatever. We made him look like $1 million when we never should have. Now, I do want to point out the fact that he holds the record for the most career touchdown passes ever in the NCAA. That's pretty impressive. And you know what? Good for him. I don't care. This is the NFL. Not starting Aiden O'Connell in this game was a huge, huge mistake because we're not going to get a chance to even see how good he could potentially be throughout the rest of the season because our schedule only gets harder from here. Next week, we're going in to play the Lions. This is a game that me and you will be feuding over, and we might have to watch it, but it will probably be turned off by the end of the second quarter, depending on how the game goes. Because I can't watch this team just ruin themselves, ruin their reputation. Any ounce of pride that they had in themselves, they throw it down the drain. Our defense was awful. Nobody brought energy. Our offense was abysmal. We cannot score. We are halfway through the season, just about, and we have yet to score over 20 points in a single game. Over 20 points. That is something any yahoo should be able to walk in on any given Sunday and be able to do. And I know people will say, well, we had 21 against the Patriots. No, we scored a safety at the end of the game that put us over 20. That was our defense. You can thank them for that. Other than that, our offense as a unit has not scored over 20 points, and it's pathetic. And you want to know something? I'm going to say it. I'm going to say what every Raider fan is thinking. I am wishing for the absolute worst case scenario here to make Josh McDaniels just look awful, to make Jimmy Garoppolo look like a pile of shit. I hope he's hurt and out for the remainder of the season. I don't wish him suffering, but I hope that it just proves that we aren't getting our money's worth on his contract. And I hope that we don't score another point this season, just so maybe Mark Davis will, quote unquote, smarten up and do what's best for the team and get that guy out of here. He's got to go. Everyone is saying it. Everyone is saying it to your face. And you still can't bring yourself to do it. The only opportunity I'm looking at, and the soonest obviously the earliest you could have done it that would have been the best was at the end of the game, just take him in a room and say, well, fly back to Las Vegas, go grab your stuff, you're out. Done. But the next place that we're looking at for him to maybe be fired is at the end of the bye week, which I believe is coming up in a couple weeks or so. We'll see what happens. Hopefully Raider fans will get what they want, which we hardly ever do, and we can finally be done with the Josh McDumbfuck era of the NFL. You know, they did a poll the other day, actually, in a pool of Lane Kiffin, Tom Cable, that other guy's name that he's the head coach of Grambling State now. What's his name? Hugh Jackson. In a world where those were our head coaches back in the day, he is the most hated. He is the most just despised among all Raider fans. I've seen people say, I would rather have Lane Kiffin coach this football team for the next 10 years than have Josh McDaniels, quote, coach one more game. That's pretty impressive. I mean, give a round of applause for old Josh McDaniels there. You have managed to become the most hated head coach in the history of a franchise that has had terrible, terrible head coaches in the past. And you are among the most terrible.
I will tell you, it's going to be very interesting next week's game because, look, I know how it's going to go regardless of what other fans think. We're going to kick your ass, and we're going to kick it nice, and I'm thinking a 20, maybe a 30-point deficit to us.
I mean, you guys are coming off angry after that Ravens loss, and you know what? That was a learning opportunity for you guys. We didn't learn anything losing to the Bears. We know what we already know. We've been saying it for the past year and a half. At least you guys can say, okay, well, we're not where we want to be just yet, but we'll work on it. Here's a perfect team to make an example of, the Raiders. So you guys will probably mop the floor with us, and I'm predicting the end score to be about 32-3.
Well, at least you got a touchdown in, and that's the only good thing we could say about the Raiders game. We didn't even get a touchdown. So, anyway, we're going to move on, and we're going to talk quickly about some other games. The Buffalo Bills were defeated by the Patriots 25-29.
That's a shocker right there. And honestly, I don't know what went wrong. I didn't watch that game. But a learning moment for the Bills. Maybe. I don't know.
And if anybody was wondering who would be the better out of the Eagles and the Dolphins, well, we got an answer to that question. Eagles won 31-17. Ouch, that was a really bad loss for the Dolphins.
I do want to make mention, because it was pointed out several times, that the officiating in that game was absolutely awful. Now, looking at the two teams, I do think the Eagles are the better team. But, and I didn't see them in person, but apparently there were some pretty obliviously bad calls that everyone is saying was bad. So that will bring me to my next game that we're going to briefly go over. The Colts versus the Browns. The Cleveland Browns beat the Indianapolis Colts 39-38. Now, both of these teams were out of a starting quarterback, but I will say PJ Walker, the quarterback for the Browns, he was pretty impressive in this game, and he came out when he had to. Garner Minshew pulled out some terrific numbers, and he made some terrific plays, and this was kind of a good little game, and I happened to watch this. But in the final moments, the Browns were in the end zone, and there was two really bad calls back-to-back against the Colts that ultimately just ruined any chance they had of winning this game. Now, this has been a struggle league-wide for several years of redefining what pass interference is, or, you know, is it catchable? Is it not catchable? Well, it depends on the person that's catching it. If the ball is way far back in the corner of the end zone, like 6 feet over the guy's head, it's not catchable. But these officials in this game would have you believe that this was a catchable ball, and therefore the barely contact that the Colts defender made against the Browns receiver was pass interference. Well, if it's not catchable, it doesn't matter. Then that's not a flag. It should never have been thrown. And I believe the other one was like a holding call or something. But the first one happened, and I was like, all right, what the heck, guys? That's a bad call. Second one happened, I was like, all right, well, what the fuck's going on now? And then they ended up pulling out a touchdown, and they won, and whatever. Good for the Browns, I guess. But the officiating the past few seasons, and I think you can agree with me because you've seen it in certain games that you've watched and you've viewed and you've articulated your own stuff from an outsider in the NFL, or I should say from an outsider of the NFL. You came in a new fan these past couple of years, and you have already pointed out to me more times than I have, that's a bad call. Like, what the heck? So we're not making any progress as a league on what is pass interference. How do we define what pass interference is? When should we throw the flag? When shouldn't we? When should we do this? When should we do that? And they just instituted this new rule that you can't challenge a play within the last 2 minutes of the game. If anything, that should be where the challenges are the most important. Because you could have thrown a red flag right there, but like, no, I'm challenging that call. That's not right. That probably would have still pulled out of their ass. Like, well, yeah, it still was pass interference because they ended up doing that. The Colts coach was, cussing out the referees and everything. And he was like, hey, what the heck was that? And then the referee decided to go over the PA and announce it again what the flag was, which I feel like was a spit in the face. It's like, yes, it was pass interference. I have no doubt in my mind it was pass interference, and it always will be pass interference. We just need consistency. I'm not even asking for like a certain rule to be in place for it to be this is pass interference, clean, cut, and dry. I'm just asking for consistency. If one thing is pass interference, but then this other thing isn't, but you're going to call one thing and not another, and it's all a mess. And we haven't made any progress on it. And you know what? I'm getting tired talking about it right now, actually, because I don't know what else to say, but also because it's a conversation that has been beaten down everybody's throat. So anyway, what do you think about the officiating of the NFL the past couple of years since you have been a fan?
It has definitely been sketchy. I mean, in sports in general, you've always had bad calls. That's something you can never get rid of. Even FIFA with the new AI kind of computer referee thing, it's not perfect. There's still bad calls being made by the computer and by the referees. So it's a sports-wide problem, but it is very prominent lately. And I don't know if it's because lately, the NFL isn't the NFL of 10 years ago. There are new rules. You can't tackle people in certain ways. You can't do certain things anymore. So it kind of limits what you're able to do within the rules. And in a way, we kind of talked about this before in our private conversation. And I mean, so has everybody else. It's kind of made football not as fun to watch anymore, because if you watch all those old clips of the hardest hitting tackles, you're like, oh, those were fucking great. Obviously, now we know, well, they took it away for CTE and all that kind of stuff, but it changed how to play football in a way. And in Formula One, especially the last few races, track limits has been such a huge thing. And you get a track limit violation, even if you go off track because you spun yourself out, you still get a violation. And then there's also many calls that, people don't understand. Why are you doing it that way? One of the biggest examples from last year was Kevin Magnussen getting a penalty for having his wing, one part of his front wing hanging from the car. But then it happened to Checo, and then they're like, well, why the fuck didn't Checo get a penalty, but we got a penalty for it? So there's some inconsistency going on, and it's becoming a big issue in Formula One. Hell, we changed sporting directors. That's basically like the main referee. We changed from Michael Massey to two guys, and then the drivers were complaining, well, these two guys are so inconsistent with each other. We don't know what the rules are or what the parameters are race to race. So it's an issue going everywhere. But in the NFL, it's gotten so much worse. And I actually asked you yesterday after band practice, I was like, do you think the NFL's telling the referees to do this on purpose, to have this controversy, to bring, more attention to the NFL, to make the games more entertaining and all that stuff, or to protect their golden goose, that's the Chiefs? And you were like, I wouldn't be surprised by it. And quite honestly, everybody has always talked about how, well, this is rigged and all this and that. And obviously there's the whole thing of the script and all that, which is a meme in itself. But at this point, you cannot tell me that there's something fishy not going on, because these are way too consistent. There are more inconsistent calls than there are consistent calls in the NFL. And that's not right. So for me personally, I think the NFL is doing something haha. I think they're fucking around and trying to make everything a little bit more entertaining and keeping their guys, such as the Chiefs, protected. And instead, it's having the opposite effect. It's like people are tired of seeing Taylor Swift on screen, because it's like, this is fucking football, not Taylor Swift's concert. If you want to see Taylor Swift, go watch her movie that she released in theaters a week ago. So I think something's going on, because it, like you said, from an outsider's point of view, you're supposed to be the number one, well, the only football league in the world, if we're going to be honest. And you can't get this shit right after what, 70 years of doing this? You cannot get the rules right? It makes no sense.
Just so we're all on the same page here, I looked it up in the NFL rulebook. Rule 8, Section 4, Article 3 of the NFL rulebook clearly states what qualifies as illegal contact or pass interference by a defender. Now, just real quick, I know you might not have seen the clip, but clearly Amari Cooper, the receiver, initiated the contact against the defender. But this is what Rule 8, Section 4, Article 3 states. Beyond the 5-yard zone, if the player who receives the snap remains in the pocket with the ball, a defender cannot initiate contact with the receiver who is attempting to evade him, which he didn't. A defender may use his hands or arms only to defend or protect himself against impending contact caused by a receiver, which he did. Because Amari Cooper initiated the contact. The ball was overthrown anyway, so this isn't pass interference regardless. But you can clearly see that the contact was initiated by Amari Cooper. And the only thing that the defensive back, and forgive me, I don't know his name off the top of my head. I believe his last name was Baker or something like that. He did the only thing he could, and so when the receiver puts a hand on you, you put the hand on a receiver. You don't block his hands from catching the ball, or you don't drag him and pull him around. No, you keep a little bit of minimal contact with him, and you stay with him. That's part of football. But they wanted to say, he reached out and he touched him. That's pass interference. So, but anyway, whatever. What are we talking about now? You're still playing Retro Bowl. Are you winning? Are you winning at least? You're winning? Okay, good. At least you're winning. And it's the only way you'll see your Detroit Lions get a win. I'm just jabbing here now.
5-2, Davis. 5-2.
Hey, did you hear that they turned the Las Vegas Raiders Stadium into a storm shelter or a tornado shelter? Yeah, apparently touchdowns never happen over there. That's a good one.
That's lame, even by your standards. All right, so let's move on from NFL, but still staying in the context of football. And let's talk about the biggest thing going on in the NCAA. Michigan State is under hot water once again, and this time it's not for improper recruitment tactics like they did in the pandemic. No, right now we have a call sign stealing scheme going on. Do you know much about it? Because I got the notes, but I want to know what you know.
I would be lying if I said that I knew everything about it. I've heard murmurs, rumors and speculation, baby, as Dusty Rhodes would say. but loosely I've heard about it, yes.
He said a whole lot of something, but he didn't say anything. Anyway,
Take notes, Josh McDaniels.
so this is what I wrote. I did some research on it earlier today. On Monday, ESPN broke the news. It was actually broken on Friday. Like, that's when it came out that, okay, something's going on with Michigan State, and this is like somebody's a suspect. But it was Monday when we got a lot of the details. So, ESPN broke the news on Monday that Michigan State was under investigation for sign call theft after it came out that Michigan staffer Connor Stallion was caught buying tickets for 30 games throughout the last 3 years to Big Ten school games that didn't involve Michigan State, meaning, they weren't playing them at that moment, but they were going to play them later on in the season. It's also known that Stallion sent tickets to at least 3 different individuals throughout the country. ESPN also reported that there is video evidence that is set to be sent to the NCAA of illegal technology being used to steal these signs, as well as an extensive paper trail. By that technology, I mean a smartphone. All the tickets were around the 45-yard line and in a high enough row that the team could be clearly seen, so they could see the team of one of the Big Ten schools. Michigan suspended Stallion with pay, but refused to comment on the matters due to them being under investigation. Stallion has also refused to comment. As of right now, it is not known who was involved, as Stallion's salary is reported to be around $55,000 a year, and the purchase of these tickets, travel, and accommodations is in the thousands per. Now, this is a direct quote from the ESPN article written by Pete Thamel and Mark Schleibeck. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Quote, the school began discovering Stallion had bought the tickets himself, and it raised suspicions because either the home school or visitors were future Michigan opponents. Stallion is a former captain of the United States Marine Corps who boasted on LinkedIn of his knack for, quote, identifying and exploiting critical vulnerabilities and centers of gravity in the opponent's scouting process, end quote.
What?
He'd been a volunteer at Michigan, according to LinkedIn, from 2015 to 2022 before he was hired full-time in May 2022, end quote. Now, as just mentioned earlier, it should also be known that Michigan State was under fire for illegal recruiting tactics. So is this a shocker that the school is under investigation again? No, but if they were involved, then boy, oh boy, they really didn't think this one through, because all this extensive paper trail is just him buying all these tickets under his real name and then sending them out to people. And then they can scan, they use the security footage to see who was the individuals at the games, and they kind of just figured by how long they were recording, when they were recording this, and all that stuff, they figured out who some of those people were. So that's what's going on right now. I'm not sure of what the punishment could be, but apparently it's a really big one because, you're stealing call signs, and I wouldn't call it, kind of like illegal. I would call it a little bit shady because, you can tune in and you can see some of those call signs. So it's not something that completely like, there's no way they could do this unless they did something really, really bad. So
No, I mean, like, if you were obsessive with it and you really sat down and watched it, it wouldn't take super long for a football expert to figure out what the play call signs meant. But so it's kind of public domain, public knowledge. But no, it's just, maybe he's just a really big football fan.
Well, it's public domain if you get it from just watching the games from the TV.
Right.
But the problem is he sent people out there to specifically record that. So I think that's the bigger issue. It's not the fact that, he figured out the play calls just by watching footage. No. He was watching footage that was taken by people he planted there. And now also the big thing is, well, who fronted the money? Because it's obviously not him.
No. This has to be the university. And if they're using the play calls, the knowledge about the play calls, then they have to be forwarding that information to the coaches, maybe the athletic director, I don't know. But you can't just take it and then sit on that information. Somebody has to be involved in receiving that information. So that's the big issue, is I think that this goes much deeper than this guy. You know, he's basically a football spy. That's actually kind of cool. But anyway, somebody has to be telling him what to do. Review the schedule, who we have coming up, and see if you can get their play call signs. Which is, you know, I know you say it's dirty, but it's not illegal. I think it is illegal.
Well, I don't know exactly the rules, but stealing play calls is illegal. So, like, the ESPN article did mention, like, 3 separate rules they can be charged with. So, they did break rules. But I think the big thing is that I believe that all the schools do it to some degrees. Because, you know, like, somebody like Georgia, Alabama, they're doing that shit. Because, you know, even though they got good players can only take you so far. If you know what the calls means for your opponents, well, then that's a winning edge. So I think all the schools have some kind of cheating going on, but it's just this guy was very dumb about it, going in a very dumb way of doing it, you know?
Several years ago, there was I don't want to say a very similar incident, but there was a somewhat similar incident in college football. I believe it was Texas versus Oklahoma. And I want to say Mike Leach was the head coach of Texas at the time. He faked that he set his playbook, misplaced it, and somehow it got in the hands of Oklahoma. And then Oklahoma tried to use it to read what plays were going on and all that kind of stuff. But it was a fake playbook, and Texas whooped them because they were going off of a fake playbook. So it can backfire on you. But in this case, I think John Harbaugh, my bad, is very invested in all this. And could you technically get them on misappropriating school funds if you can prove that they were the ones buying the tickets? Or, I don't know, maybe it's coming straight out of this guy's paycheck, or I don't know. It's a very interesting situation. I think they should be banned from bowl games for maybe the next couple years. People involved need to be fired. That's what I think.
Well, depending on, you know, why they were doing it. I mean, obviously we know they were doing it just to win games. But if people had money on those games, because you could also say, well, they knew those play calls because if they had money in those games, maybe they knew, okay, that play means that. So let's play something that we know we're going to lose. That way we can rake in the money. But not a lot has come out, but it's going to be very interesting to see what was going on. I do think he used his money and then the school reimbursed him, but they were doing it in a way to not leave a paper trail, which they could have probably left an electronic trail through banks and stuff like that. Because I don't think they would have like $5,000 given to him in brown paper bag.
Does his job very well. Clearly not that well. He got caught, but you know.
So yeah, that's the big thing that was going on in the NCAA. Don't know what the repercussions are going to be just yet. We're going to have to wait to see for a verdict, but that's it. Now, let's move on to Formula One, where Max Verstappen won the sprint race and the normal race at Austin, Texas, at the Circuit of the Americas. But it wasn't easy sailing for Max.
I'm snoring over here.
So am I.
Max, Super Max.
Even though Max Verstappen won the race, it wasn't exactly a stress-free race. Since the beginning of the race, he suffered from brake issues. And actually, people have been doing the math and just thinking about all of the potential that, you know, Mercedes had and Lewis Hamilton. They think that Lewis could have overtaken Max if they would have covered Max Verstappen. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, throughout the year, Max has been unstoppable. Everybody has been bringing him upgrades. Red Bull brings 1 or 2 every couple of races just because they're not having enough wind tunnel time, CFD time. They don't have all that time because they were punished for breaking the rules in 2021 about overspending. So they haven't really developed that car, yet that car has been incredibly fast. And right now we're seeing them catch up a little bit more to Max. So throughout the year, because he was just so dominant, they would go on their own strategies. They wouldn't try to copy Max. Now, usually in a race, that's what you would do. You would follow what the leader does. So if you're in second place and the leader starts on softs, well, you start on softs. If they box for mediums, you box for mediums to cover them. Now, Mercedes didn't do that. And that would be the logical thing. But they didn't do it because during the sprint race, Max had no issues with his brake. And by lap 19 of the sprint race, he was already 20 seconds ahead of, I believe, Oscar Piastri, who was in P2. I'm not completely sure. But they figured, oh, well, Max is dominant. And then it's kind of like halfway through the race, they realized, oh, shit, he has an issue. But the strategy they went on kind of prevented Lewis from completely getting close to Max and overtaking. He got super close. He got under 2 seconds. But even if he would have followed Max, covered him off, and done everything right, he still would have not won the race. And that's because afterwards, the FIA, and they do this in every motorsport, they pick a couple of random cars and they're like, okay, we're going to test this and this for the car. So in Japan, they tested for batteries and stuff like that. In COTA, they test for the skid block, which is this glass resin long board that looks wooden. And it's basically put in place because in 1994, I believe, Ayrton Senna died and his car was too low to the ground and it just had an issue and he ended up crashing out and died. Sad situation. So they introduced the skid block. And if you shave off too much of the skid block, then that tells the FIA, okay, you've been running this car too low. And not only is there an unfair advantage in that because, you know, the closer you are to the ground with these ground effect cars, the more air is going down and more downforce you're getting, which is great. But you're also putting at risk the driver's health with porpoising, which we saw a lot of porpoising in COTA. But you just putting the driver and the car, and just a lot of people were at risk with that. So they checked it in COTA and they found that Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were in violation of the skid board being too worn down. Now they tested 2 other drivers as well, that's Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. And they concluded, well, based on this, we can assume that if out of the 4 drivers that we tested, 2 of them were disqualified for being too worn down on their boards, then that means that more than likely half the field would be disqualified at this point. But they don't check every car. And some people are saying, well, why don't they check the rest of the cars? Well, it's because that would take too much time, and they have to get these cars to Mexico for the Grand Prix this week. So that's how it goes. And NASCAR is the same thing. They test only the first couple of cars, and it's at a random. So sometimes it could be Max Verstappen is being checked like 3-4 times in a row, or Lewis Hamilton 2 or 3, and then nothing for the rest of the season. It just depends. So in the end, though, Lewis Hamilton lost P2. He was disqualified. Charles Leclerc, who, by the way, started on pole position, ended up being disqualified. And it was actually a good thing that Charles and Lewis Hamilton were disqualified, because somebody did the math, and it turns out that if Lewis would have kept the second place, Ferrari would have lost by 5 points compared to Mercedes. But because Carlos Sainz was promoted to P3 and Charles Leclerc was disqualified, and so was Lewis Hamilton, ended up being that Ferrari was ahead by 3 or 4 points, something like that. But yeah, that was the Formula One Grand Prix. Not a lot went on. Lando got P2. He was promoted from P3 to P2, so congrats to Lando. Anyway, we've kind of run long, and I don't really want to edit more than I have to, so why don't you do your little plugins and take us home, white boy.
I'll be happy to do so. Thank you guys for listening to this episode of the WaterBoy Experience. You can follow us on Twitter or on TikTok at the WaterBoy Pod. Listen to us wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Until next time, I am Davis McLemore. This is Jason Shaddix. We're tired. This has been a long week. We're done. Thank you guys for listening to this episode of the WaterBoy Experience, and peace.
It's only Tuesday. How can it be a long week?
It's just a long week. It was a long week on Sunday. It's like a heaviness. It hangs over my head every morning. I wake up high heaviness.
Again, you and your horrible jokes.
Second and goal just outside the 10. Carr tips it in, and it's